Hello and welcome back to another episode of Vikings Happy Hour, sponsored by Lake Monster Brewing and That's Badass Wood Art. Remember to use promo code CTPocket and get 20% off any one item at that'sbadasswoodart.com. And if you're joining us here this morning, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Our goal is 3,000 subscribers by the NFL draft. So today we're joined by Brad Spielberger of Pro Football Focus, NFL cap. Do you prefer cap expert or just cap analyst? Because cap is confusing.
For expert, right?
Guru expert, all that
Guru
stuff,
plays. Right? Yeah, Guru plays.
There's been a lot of just Viking restructures going on. And for the common fan, we don't know what that entails. And so we thought it'd be a good idea to get you on the show and kind of help walk through some of how contract restructures work, the cap, but more specifically, what the Vikings did with Kirk Cousins' contract. Because I think a lot of fans were a little bit confused, and I don't know if we've truly gotten a clear answer on what they did. So, yeah, what are your thoughts then on the Kirk Cousins stuff?
Yeah, and could you if you could just talk about more with Kirk too about like maybe the why the Vikings did it too, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I think the biggest takeaway for me, the biggest signal, and you can't not extend him, but I would say if you're upset about them pushing cap down the line and you wanted them to maybe take all the hit this year, it probably still does suggest that they're not going to extend him. They're going to let this contract play out, and if that is your desire as a Vikings fan, I know that doesn't apply to every fan, then that I think is more likely now given this move. So realistically, because there's only 2 years left in the deal, there's 1 year, and then there's all the dead cap that will hit in 2024 because there already were void years that held a bunch of dead cap. Realistically, what they did is just push a bunch of money from this year into next year so that they can spend a little bit more now by clearing 2023 cap space, and there will just be a larger, dead cap hit that accelerates next year. So in general, you don't necessarily always want to push cap down the line. It is a credit card that bill does come due, but when it's a 2-year proposition effectively, and it is not going to change, your decision to cut him or keep him, or, if it was a player like that, he had like 3 or 4 years left and that came into play, then maybe you say, why would you do this? Why would you push cap in the line on an older player, yada, yada, yada. Realistically here, the space you create, there's carryover cap space every offseason, right? So the excess cap space you have at the end of each year, you roll over into the following year as carryover. So you could argue this is just them, honestly, just the carryover they created. It'll absorb the larger cap hit next year when his deal does void. So it's kind of just pushing dollars around, so that you can add some talent like Marcus Davenport, Byron Murphy, and do some things, in the current year.
With that, Brad, so do you think, the one thing the Vikings didn't do that we've seen previously is they didn't post June 1 cut and Adam Thielen. Yep. Do you think the Kirk Cousins situation kind of factored into that because they ate that all in the chin this year so that they could, because they know that the dead cap for Kirk Cousins is expected to be so large next year and they didn't want to split that out?
I do. And I think that's another way to also kind of clear room to let yourself take those full hits on other players this year, right? So don't do it with everyone. Don't post June 1 a bunch of guys. Don't restructure, do all these things. But, they obviously tried with Dalvin Tomlinson pushing that void date back and trying to get a deal done. But when they couldn't, I think it was smart to say, you know what, let's just take the full brunt of it now. They're still going to try to contend next year or compete next year, to a degree, but also I think being smart about, also we do have a handful of holes. We are moving on from a bunch of older players. So we're not going to just keep pushing everything down the line and being unrealistic with where we're at. We're going to take some of these hits now in full and kind of have a cleaner books going forward, which I think is sound process, no question.
There are some contracts that you don't have to approach a player to restructure, right? I think Brian O'Neill is in that category.
So about 95% of the time when you see restructure where a team takes salary and converts it into a bonus and spreads it over the rest of the contract, the remaining years, the team has a unilateral right to do that. The times where you need the player sign off is if you add void years, which I believe with Kirk Cousins, they added 2 more void years. So he had to actually sign off on them doing that. That's the only But otherwise, okay. I always see like, oh, this player did the team a favor, and no, they didn't do anything. They got an email. The agent got an email saying, hey, by the way, we restructured your contract. That's what happened.
and here's a check for however much that is right up front, right? Isn't that what happens?
So
typically,
usually also, which is interesting, you actually still get paid in the same manner. So I probably even told you in the past that you get it as a bonus. And actually, the way it works is you still generally get the cash paid out the same way it originally was supposed to be paid out. So if it's a salary, you still get it paid as salary. The one benefit to the player, you're probably thinking like, wow, why would players agree to that? You do effectively like guarantee that year, right? Because once the team does that, they're not going to cut you after that. So it's a pseudo like guarantee of that salary, which is, I guess, one benefit to the player.
I know for all of us oh, go ahead, Ryan. I've already.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just along those lines. So, is there a benefit to because it looks like with Kirk Cousins, they did it on his roster bonus versus his salary. Is I think what I read. Is there a benefit to doing it one way or another?
They probably just did that because the roster bonus is due and soon, so you might as well get it do it with cash that you're already going to pay, and then still be able to pay out salary in the same manner. It's kind of an either or. I don't think it really matters in this case. I don't think it was a $20 million roster bonus versus a $10 million salary. So wanted to clear a big chunk, clear $16 million in space. But yeah, I think it was kind of just, hey, this one's coming due soon. Let's just get it out of the way.
Sure.
The question I had for you, and I think all of us on here know what it is, but just for viewers' sake, the NFL has kind of picked up a trend of adding void years to contracts. I think Kwesi wants to get away from that to a certain degree, if it kind of just from what I'm seeing. But can you kind of explain what void years do for teams?
Yeah. So, I mean, the Niners where he came from are not big on void years, although the Browns are huge on void years. So I guess depending where you look at Kwesi's influence, essentially what void years do is we're talking about all this restructuring and pushing cap hits down the line, all these things. You can push cap out up to a maximum of 5 years. So if a player has 3 years left on his deal, but you wanted to take that $20 million roster bonus for Kirk Cousins, this is the example, and there were 1 real year and 2 void years left, you could only clear a certain amount of money. If you want to max that out and clear as much 2023 cap space as possible, you can add more void years. So for Kirk, add 4 total void years and have the current year plus 4 extra years, and that's how you cleared $16 million because of the 20, $4 million goes into each year remaining. So that's what teams have been doing. It's just an accounting mechanism. They're not real contract years. The player is not under contract to play in those seasons. It's just effectively a dummy contract year in the deal.
Keep it on the Kirk train. When you explained his restructure and the void years added, because he had 2 void years added to the original deal. They added 2 more. You said that Kirk had to sign off on this new one. Can you talk more? So my question is, why would Kirk agree to that without getting an extension? Because he's not getting any more money in the deal. But also, I guess my question or rebuttal to that is also, is it because you think it helps give him more leverage back because of the dead cap hit that it accelerates into next year? Couple questions there, but yeah.
It's all good ones too. So, like I said, I would assume that they had to sign off on it. There are a couple contracts across the NFL that the team also, it's very recent to my knowledge, where it also says not only do we have unilateral right to restructure, we have the unilateral right to add void years. But I have not seen that in Minnesota language yet that I've seen. So I believe he had to sign off on it. It is a good question. There are instances most recently before the Chiefs traded away Tyreek Hill, but going into the last year, they actually wanted to add void years and restructure his contract. And he said, well, extend me then. Like, I'm not signing off on a quote unquote extension because effectively you are kind of adding years, right? And so, yeah, he said no. Like, so they had to go and restructure other contracts and do other things. Kirk certainly in his camp certainly could have said, yeah, you know what? Like, we're not going to make life easier on you and allow you to restructure and clear a bunch of room, and you're not willing to give us more money on a new deal. So they could have gone that route. I think, like you said, it's probably true, right? I mean, there's now, if they do move on after the season, an additional $16 million in dead cap that comes up to 2024. But, as we know, and I'm sure we've talked about in the past, because Kirk is untaggable, I mean, he has all the leverage. If they do go into this season as the last year of the deal, he has all the leverage in the world. The salary cap's the last of their concern. getting as much cash as possible, and the Vikings can't really stop them from talking to whoever they want to.
That makes sense. Yeah, thought that was interesting. Okay, cool.
So it really appears that the Vikings are attempting to build for 2024, right? Like when we talk about them taking on a bunch of dead cap, not post June 1sting people.
You mean a competitive rebuild, Matt? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I wasn't going to say it outright, but yes, a competitive rebuild. Do you think that's the smart way to go about this for the Kwesi and the Vikings?
I like the moves they've made and how they've gone about it, right? Where you're adding younger players on short-term deals, and realistically, if things go great with Marcus Davenport, you keep him around. If they don't, you say, you know what, we bought low on a player that his production is far exceeds his contract. Of course, has been health with him, but you get him in the building, you become familiar with him. It's voted the number one building in the NFL for a reason. Like, you can sell these players on the culture and the environment, and the atmosphere, yada yada yada. I don't know if he's going to love the weather as a Texas guy and New Orleans guy, but yeah. So, I think with his player has missed some time, 2-year deal.
Uh-oh, I think we're losing Brad.
Looks like we're losing you a little bit there, Brad.
Oh, you lost me?
We're good now. We're good.
Am I back?
Yep. Maybe.
You got me? What was I rambling about?
That dial-up internet, Brad. What's going on?
Is it my fault? Do you think it's my fault? All right, hold on.
I don't know.
It seems good right now.
Probably is. All right, close a bunch of tabs. You got me now?
We got you.
Yeah.
All right, what was I saying? Now. So, yeah, I mean, Murphy and Davenport, like the moves we made is 25, 26-year-old players on short-term deals. I know we make fun of the cliches of competitive rebuild, and I didn't love what they did last year. It did, you could argue, work out. They obviously won a ton of games. But, I think, all the veterans they've now moved on from this year, you maybe just do that last year. But again, look, I think Viking fans would take a division win and everything that happened. But yes, I have enjoyed what they've done this offseason so far. I think they've made some very solid moves.
That's bold of you, by the way, because you're wearing that Bears shirt.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Brad, you
should have changed.
No, it's good. I knew you're a Bears fan. You had mentioned the short-term deals, like Kwesi signing across the NFL as a whole, from a player and a team standpoint. We've seen a lot more of the shorter 2-3 year type deals. Do you think that's it's just going to continue to be more common? Besides, I feel like quarterback's the only position it might not really be for that, but everywhere else it seems to be the case.
100%. So that is a player-driven push. Look, if you're not going to guarantee later years of contracts, then we're not going to take them, right? I mean, that's the whole kind of argument and battle we're seeing in various different ways, quarterbacks and non-quarterbacks. But yeah, so players want as short as deal as possible, because if you do play well, you get back to the market as soon as possible. Even if it's a 3-year deal, but you play very well the first 2, you can still go to the table and say, okay, now I need an extension. You got to give me new money, or you're going to lose me after this following season. So yes, that is, and it's been interesting at certain positions too. Like linebacker had been very hard to get less than a 5-year deal. Tremaine Edmonds, talking about the Bears, like every linebacker coming up across the NFL should be happy that Tremaine Edmonds got that 4-year deal. It helps when you see precedent change at certain spots, because teams are always going to point to, well, Fred Warner, Shaq Leonard, and C.J. Mosley all have 5-year contracts. Well, yeah, but Tremaine Edmonds got 4, so I want 4. So yes, that is going to continue to be a trend, and I think it's very smart for the players and their reps to do that.
So just to piggyback kind of off of that 2-year deal stuff, we do see some of the 4-year, 5-year deals, but they're almost fake to a certain extent. What's the benefit for a team to even, if we all know the intention is 2 years and retest the market, whether it's them releasing it or reworking the contract, why even mess around with doing these 4-year, 5-year deals that are
control?
It's all about control. He answered it for me. Yeah, it's as simple as that. It's as simple as that.
Fair enough. We do
hey,
have
Brad, I had a question. So you kind of built an algorithm, so to speak, for draft capital, if I'm not mistaken. And with that, I'm just kind of interested in we have players like Dalvin Cook. We didn't end up trading Cam Dantzler, which I'm kind of surprised. We just outright waived him. what kind of goes into the valuation of a player and then the draft capital assigned to that player? Like hypothetically, let's say Dalvin Cook gets traded today. How do you go about valuing an aging player on a big contract versus maybe a young, talented player who's been injured on a rookie contract? And how come one might get a late round pick and one is getting waived?
Yeah, no, for sure. So the contract is maybe the biggest part. I mean, obviously their production and how they are as a player. I use our wins above replacement metric here. I adjust it for age, for draft status. I will look into games missed due to injury, things of that nature, or if they just have had a bad injury, like a ligament tear, something like that. You also look at the market, so you tweak it for market factors. Like, I mean, you're talking about running back. I mean, right now as a running back, the market is terrible. It's borderline non-existent. Guys are getting cut. Guys are getting asked to take pay cuts. Austin Ekeler's trying to get traded because the Chargers probably aren't even close to what he wants on an extension. So all those things is big, but then the contract is big. How many years are remaining, and how much guaranteed money is still remaining on that deal? Because when you trade for a player, especially if you're going to give up big capital, you're giving a ton of leverage to that player, right? They're coming in and saying, you've already invested in me. You've already given up premium assets or quality resources to go get me. So now you have to give me new money and extend me or whatever the case may be because you've done that. So, with Dalvin, it's not going to be much. If they do trade him, it's not going to be a big return. I'm sure Vikings fans aren't going to be happy, but that's just the market, right? No one's trying to pay a lot of money to an aging player at that position. I mean, I think he's been better than Zeke Elliott the last couple of years, but Zeke Elliott is 27 years old and just got cut off a $10.9 million salary, and no one in the world is surprised by that in any way, shape, or form. So with a younger guy, Dantzler move was weird to me. You'd think a guy, look, I know he's been up and down and had some solid spouts of play, some tough runs. To not get anything and just waive him, maybe you're hoping someone just picks up that contract, and I guess not that you're on the hook for anything. There's no guarantees left. But, yeah, I don't know. That one, maybe there's more going on there than football. I don't want to speculate or anything like that, but I did find that to be a bit of a strange move. It's also the classic just, hey, this isn't our guy. We didn't draft him. He's an old regime guy, so we don't really care about moving on, which they've shown, right away when they got in there last year and cut basically every player in the draft class that they're not a huge fan of what was left behind.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then just quick on draft capital, kind of question again. So obviously we're in a position where we only have, I think, 5 picks. So we're very draft capital poor right now. So the idea is to trade back. What would be in would you advocate your Bears to trade up and to give up their first, or their 2 second-round picks? Or what's a fair compensation for us to move back from 24 that can maximize our day 2 value?
I think it's definitely on the table. I think it's very likely they try to trade down. We obviously saw it last year. You pick up some second-round picks and add some capital. Yeah, I mean, Kwesi is clearly operating in a space of he doesn't care about the traditional draft charts and the value on those things. Again, last year, a bunch of people, Jimmy Johnson says he lost his trade. Well, the nerd charts, mine included, says he won. And again, I'm not saying it's definitive or anything like that, but how you break that down and how you value draft capital is different. And he's clearly comfortable going outside the box there. I think it is smart. I think long term, obviously, it's all about results-based analysis. And, I think, Lewis Cine missing the entire season is not great. But from a process standpoint, I think it is sound. I think in the long haul, it does work out based on historical evidence. It is smart. I think I'd be surprised if they don't trade down at least once.
I know we want to get to a JJ contract, what that might look like, but I do want to pose this question to you from someone in the chat. And we saw that the Vikings made it official that they've agreed to terms with Davenport. But it came out yesterday through many media outlets that there's still some details that are kind of held up. What are some of the common reasons why a contract could still be held up with Davenport?
So, not saying this in reference to him, that I'm guessing this is his reason, but look, I mean, the physical and getting that physical done, especially for a player with an injury history, is going to be a huge one. And then sometimes it is just a matter of ironing out language, figuring out, guarantee forfeiture or voiding guarantees or salary forfeiture, or, whether it's a money thing, which, was Randy Gregory last year. It's why he's a Denver Bronco and not a Dallas Cowboy. So it's the fine print. It's a lot of the, nitty gritty of the contracts. Usually it works out and it's fine. But yeah, I would say those are the big two: is kind of health, and then just some of the finer print of the club trying to protect themselves and the player trying to protect themselves.
Perfect. Miles, I know you've been itching to ask about the JJ question, so I'll let you take it.
Well, so you had talked about the short-term extensions, and I've seen so many people say they expect Justin Jefferson. I would expect him to sign an extension with the Vikings because it feels like kind of like the NBA. If a player wants out of his caliber, they're going to get out of the situation. Like if he ever wanted to get traded by the Vikings and force his way out, he probably could, just because of the way players have control of certain players. But I've seen people say things like, "Oh, maybe JJ signs a 4 or 5 year extension," and I never believe that, and more so because of kind of what you mentioned earlier. What do you think the parameters of an extension for JJ would be, and why would he sign one now rather than wait it out as the cap continues to go up?
Yeah. So look, he has 2 years left realistically, right? Because he has his 4th year and the 5th year option remaining. There's no shot it's a 5-year deal. I would be shocked. And particularly, we're talking about the position specifically. We saw last offseason with DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin, all going to the 3-year extension. AJ Brown did go 4, following a trade, and it kind of is, 3 and then a year at the end that we'll see what actually happens there. He could play on it, but why Jefferson would do it. So I would say if he does it this offseason, you're going to know, hey, the cap is going here. The wide receiver market is going here. I know that if you look at over the cap or anywhere, it says Tyreek Hill leads the market at $30 million per year. Realistically, his deal is for $25 million a year. There's no shot he plays some of the later years of that contract. Devontae Adams' deal is nowhere close to $28 million a year. It's like 22.5 over 3, and then kind of we'll see from there. So I think Jefferson would do it if it's truly like a 3-year, $90 million extension, a legitimate $30 million per year extension, maybe even more than that. On top of his last 2 years, because look, you do the cap is going to go up, but at the end of the day, you're not going to turn down a very, very strong getting all this money now. Look, injuries happen, down production happens. Kirk will be there, but I don't know. Let's say you don't do it and Kirk gets hurt, and then you have Nick Mullins, or there's all these factors that you can always think of through your mind. But to the point of why do it if you know the market's going to rise? Him and his camp, if they're smart, which off the top of my head, I think, he does have a good agent. They would know, look, we're signing a deal that we're thinking of the first new year of this deal is 2025. We're not talking about the current market. We're talking about the market that it will be at when we start. So yeah, 30 million is a floor. And again, I'm saying that no one's at 30. And I think that would be the floor of an APY for a new contract.
That makes sense.
Piggybacking off that, there's also another player that is likely up for an extension. A couple of them, and we can get to them real quick. The first one's TJ Hockenson. What does that even look like? Because I feel like he's still kind of ascending into that top tier. I mean, I think he's in the top tier of tight ends in the NFL, but he's on the way up even further. So what does a contract for him look like?
Let's say this. I'm not trying to be too strong. If he doesn't reset the market, he's doing a disservice to the entire tight end position. And it's a position that, and I know that might be a little scary sounding, but it's a position market that has struggled to grow for a while now. I know Darren Waller technically signed a new deal for $17 million a year, but again, kind of fugazi, kind of funny money. So realistically, George Kittle's $15 million per year extension signed in 2020, I want to say it is still, in my opinion, the top deal on the market. And that is years ago, right? And so, look, I know because, Hockenson's not George Kittle. No, he's not. He's not Mark Andrews. He's not Travis Kelce. No, but I agree with you. I think he's a top 5, top 7, whatever you want to say at tight end. He's still young. He was incredibly productive as a Minnesota Viking last year specifically. Has the first-round pedigree, the top 10 pick, all of those things. And then, of course, the last piece, like we touched on as well, was traded for, a 2, 3, 4, whatever it was. I know Minnesota got picks back. I actually love that trade for the Vikings from a value standpoint. But nevertheless, you do have the leverage of you guys traded some premium capital to go get me. You brought me in going into my 5th year option year next season. Yeah, it has to be $17 million a year or more. Like I said, otherwise, if I'm a tight end coming up behind him, I'm just like, you just killed me. And that's what I would feel if I was one of the young guys coming up next.
Yeah. I mean, the money that the Vikings have to start to pay these guys, which is a good thing. It's going to be a lot. And Ryan, I think you were going to head to another player here.
Yeah. So one of the contracts that's really interesting to me is Danielle Hunter's, and just, I mean, we're in a position where we can't move him or we can't cut him without taking a huge hit, but he's not making a lot of money this year, so he's probably going to want a new deal. What would you do in that situation and to kind of rectify that?
Yeah, he's scheduled to earn like $5.5 million. There's a 0% chance, and I may have said this before, and he did show up, but now coming off a healthy season, he's not playing for that money. So, it'll be interesting. I think Hunter might want to wait for, and I'm not saying he's going to get in this range, but I think Nick Bosa is going to get $32 million a year. I think Brian Burns is going to shoot for 30. I think there are a handful of, I don't know if Montez Sweat gets done now that Deron Payne got signed, but he could get above 20, maybe into the 25 range per year. If you're Danielle Hunter, I know you're on your third contract, but he's like these guys' age somehow still, or like a year or two older than a lot of these dudes. It's got to be above 20 million per year, even with the injuries and all those things. I just don't see a way where he takes less than that. And yeah, it kind of just depends on where the market goes. I think working in his favor is the free agent class at edge rusher stinks. One of the worst position group free agency groups around. The draft class at edge is not exciting, really. There's some players there, but I don't think anyone's super stoked about this edge unit compared to years past. So yeah, it's going to be – I'm sure he'll want to go short-term as well, because the 5-year deal that him and Stephon Diggs took, they both hated pretty quickly. Understandably, they outplayed it immediately. So, yeah, like 3 years, you're looking at probably 22, 23, 24. I don't know his health. Those things all matter, but he was pretty darn good last year. And, I know Flores – historically has run some odd fronts, but I think he will be more multiple. I think there will be more even fronts. If you felt like Hunter wasn't a great fit, I think he'll be deployed even better. And again, he was productive last year, but I think Flores will use him even better than he was last year. So long answer short, a very big extent. Those three guys are about to get paid.
That's sweet. My last question for you, Brad, is back to quarterback. With kind of what you mentioned at the top of the show about Kirk Cousins and kind of the anticipation that he likely plays out the deal now because of the restructure and all that. Where do you think the best route for the Vikings to go is to get their QB of the future? Because you kind of mentioned earlier, maybe they trade back from 23, 24, whatever that pick is. I know the wonky shit. But, what do you think the best route for the Vikings is to find their QB of the future if it's not to trade up this year?
Yeah, I don't think they can trade up this year. I don't think you want to. I mean, look, I know you did the Kellen Mond experience, but you still could consider a Hendon Hooker in the second round, who I think is a better player and a better prospect. Obviously had the ACL tear, but if you want to go that route, you could at least take a late round flyer on a guy, Jake Hayner or something. Say, hey, let's take this guy on day 3 and see what there is there. Because look, you're not going to tank, or you're not going to be in the conversation for Caleb Williams and Drake May. I'm not saying you should. I think the roster has too much talent to do that. But I will say this, that we are getting to a point. I know I put this tweet out. I was mostly conspiracy theorizing, but I think it's interesting. Look around the league and see if there are guys like a Trey Lance, just one example to use. I mean, look, I think it's Brock Purdy's team at this point. They bring in Sam Darnold, so they have a backup that at least they say, hey, we have a second body here in the building. Hey, I'd give a call. Hey, Trey's from Minnesota. Hey, I know it hasn't gone well for you guys, but we'll throw you a second round pick and we'll bring him in. And, I think you got to get creative. And I think that is just one example that comes to mind for a lot of different reasons of a way you can kind of creatively bring in a talent that was viewed in that realm. And things obviously haven't gone great so far, but see if you can untap some of that potential in a new building.
That makes sense. I was kind of hoping that was going to happen this offseason, to be honest, but clearly that's probably not going to happen.
Time. We'll I think the injuries to Purdy and Lance are going to make that wait until an August. That's a down the road thing. But hey, I don't think it's impossible. I mean, signing some Darnold's contract's small, but that was not a nothing move to me. I think that meant something. I see a question here. How's Dorian Thomas-Robinson in the 6th? Yeah, I'm cool with that. I mean, the guy's got a hose. Got to get a little more accurate, but a good athlete, good player, competitive as hell. That's it. Yeah, I love those day 3 flyer type picks.
Do you think it makes sense to? Yeah, I know. Do you think it makes sense to bring Trey in after Kirk's restructure? And just maybe be the backup, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, 100%. No, you don't have to guarantee him a starting job right away. It gives you leverage if you do try to keep Kirk and say, well, if you don't sign this deal, you can go find a new home at 36 years old, whatever. We have a guy behind you. You don't have to make him starter right away. Bring him in and say, hey, We're going to get you with Kevin O'Connell, get you in the building. We're going to find a way to make you the 2024 starter and get your career back on track. I think he'd go for that. As of right now, look, he could win the job in San Fran. I'm sure he'll get a legitimate chance. But yeah, I don't know. When you have like McCaffrey and Kittle and dudes coming out and saying this is basically saying this is Brock's team, I think it's going to be hard to go back on that next year.
Absolutely. Ryan, any last questions from you?
Just maybe just one little pitch for why I should migrate to your draft capital model versus Jimmy Johnson's.
Well, here's the thing. If you want to actually like predict what teams are going to do, you should still be using Jimmy Johnson. That still controls the marketplace. And if you mock up a trade where it's zero sum or it's even for both parties in the Jimmy Johnson calculator, then that is more realistic and more likely. Ours is more trying to say it's just based on the results of the draft picks themselves. So based on how these guys have performed historically, here's what the picks should be valued at. It's similar to the AV chart. It's similar to the PFF's chart. It's similar to a lot of charts that I know Harvard created a chart. Our values are almost identical. I'm not sure exactly how Harvard created theirs, but I'll tell you this. If you want to get more inside the mind of your team's GM and what he's thinking about and looking at, then you should look at ours and, just, hey, it's a positive value on this one. So even though Johnson doesn't like it, maybe Kwesi thinks it's not the worst trade in the world. I mean, the Jameson Williams trade, the only way he pulls that trade off is if he's looking at charts like ours, and that makes him feel comfortable when he does it. So
I
awesome.
do
love it.
A piggyback off of that, just because I'm genuinely curious. How do teams value future picks? Because I feel like it's just kind of a gray area. You don't know where these teams are going to pick in the following year. I mean, I'm sure the Broncos.
Besides the Rams don't count.
Yes. I'll just leave it. How do you value future draft picks?
Yeah, so it's funny. So I guess I should mention this too. I wrote about 90% of that book in Eagan, Minnesota, at an extended stay hotel when I was interning with the Vikings. But yeah, that book was created in Minnesota in good old Eagan at the Chili's in Eagan, Minnesota. Shout out. But anyway, so. I asked around a bunch of people. I actually don't even know if I talked to the Vikings about this specifically, but you generally just dock it a year. So a first-round pick in 2024 would carry a second-round value. A second-round pick would carry a third-round value, and so on and so forth. I often get asked, what pick in the round do they go based on? No, it's kind of just the middle. So a future first, I just use pick 48. A second pick, I use pick 80. So kind of, right in the middle of that following round. And if you go back again historically and look at prior trades on the Jimmy Johnson chart, if you use those values, a lot of times you'll get trades that are like dead even or very, very close to even. So, it's kind of more back testing. But I did have a couple teams tell me during the process, like, yeah, we just dock it to the middle of the following year's round. So
got it.
I was looking at it because I was trying to do some like mock drafts or whatever and try to trade up for one of these quarterbacks using future draft picks. And I'm thinking,
and always drafting Marvin Mims. And everyone.
Well, always drafting Marvin Mims, yes. But I'm thinking, gosh, why wouldn't a team rather have our next year's first-round pick versus this year? Because we won 13 games last year. Very unlikely that we can get to that spot again. And even if that means that we still make the playoffs, we're probably going to be lower in the playoff seeding versus a 3 seed and a 13-win team. So, the value probably more than likely is going to be higher next year.
I think, those type of things, I'm sure they're going to fold in, or they're going to think about where do we think this team is going. I know it came out, the Raiders, when they traded Khalil Mack to the Bears, like the Bears and Packers with the two big suitors there, and the Raiders smartly, well, I guess just give them to the Bears because their picks are going to be higher. I think it's probably always a safe proposition against Green Bay. But yeah, so some of that is going to get folded in. Yes, teams are going to think about that to a degree, but I will say for the most part, and I think we know this too, we have a lot of predictions. We think a lot of things coming into the year, and then we get some surprise teams. So, it can backfire as well. I mean, Houston, sending 2 first-round picks for Laremy Tunsil, end up giving the 3rd overall pick to the Miami Dolphins. This year we have the Rams and Seahawks giving the 6th pick to the Lions, the 5th pick to the Seahawks from the Broncos. Yes, you can play those games a little bit, but it can backfire pretty quickly as well.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that's all we have for you today. So we're super grateful you could hop on and chat with us, even though you did wear the Bears shirt today. So next time we'll just make sure you throw that Vikings one on.
You guys are making some moves.
I
some
do
good
love
moves.
what you're doing over there in Chicago.
We appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, I'll make sure I get my Vikings shirt, my Vikings polo next time. I don't think it fits. I was skinny back when I worked there. So, but I'll lose some weight for the next show. And I appreciate you guys for having me on.
For everyone watching and in the comments, thank you for joining us. You can follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Great content, great work, and constantly on my time just speaking good truth, and I love it. So
appreciate it.
Make sure you hit that like and subscribe button to help us hit our goal of 3,000 subscribers by the NFL draft. And in the coming weeks and days and hours, who knows? The Vikings free agency journey is still underway, so we may see you sooner than next week. But until next time, everybody, SKOL Vikings.